Good afternoon, everyone. You're tuned into the Community Hour with myself, Prerna, on NuSound Radio 92 FM, and I'll be with you till 1 p.m. And today in the studio, I am joined with a very special guest, Rita Chadha from RAMFEL, which is a refugee and migrant forum of Essex and London. Hi, Rita. How are you today?
I'm fine.
Many thanks. I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for coming to the studio.
A pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about RAMFEL.
Well, this is our 21st anniversary year.
Mm-hmm.
We're a charity. We're a small charity. We're not that big. We have about 4 or 5 staff and a turnover about 200,000 a year. Our main work is working with refugees and asylum seekers, not the most popular people at the moment, but our job is to help them in any way that in any way that we can.
Oh, brilliant. And did you say your turnover, so you get 200,000 refugees coming to visit you?
No, a year, every week we help about between 150 and 200 people.
That's amazing. So there's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people, but we cover across East London and Essex as well.
Oh, okay. You were recently featured on a documentary on BBC Two, which was The Hidden World of Britain's Immigrants. Is that right?
That's right. That was on BBC Two, I think, this Wednesday. So I think we're still a bit reeling from the shock of the media exposure from that.
I can imagine, because I saw the programme myself and I thought it's amazing what you do to help immigrants and the problems they face, which people aren't normally aware about.
I think what was interesting about that documentary was it showed a different side of immigration, and people are used to the criticisms about numbers, about too many people being here, about Romanians, about Bulgarians. What they often don't see is that actually people don't get benefits, they don't get any access to services. And even for those who want to go back, especially from the Indian subcontinent, there's huge problems. And despite the government's go home vans, it doesn't work as easily as just hopping onto a plane and going back home.
I know, because I was under the perception that, if you do want to go home, the government will pay for you to go home. And if you're having a struggle and a hard life in England, then, it'd be the most logical thing to do is just go back to India. But after having seen the documentary, and most people who do come here, they burn their passports. Is that right? Is it quite a lot of immigrants burn their passports?
There's several routes in. And for those people that are stuck and may have come in through what people call illegal routes, sometimes they're coming through agents who, once they've reached the airport or reached the motorway, will take their passports off them.
Oh, really?
So that's a huge problem as well. Very few people actually have passports that they can destroy. The other problem is as well that a lot of them end up sleeping on the streets, and on there it's very difficult to keep your documents safe as well. So a lot of people do genuinely lose their passports as well.
I can imagine, because in the show as well, it showed people sleeping in parks, in graveyards and all sorts. So they do have it quite tough.
Absolutely. It's estimated that at least a third of London's migrants at the moment, of street sleepers at the moment, are actually migrants in this position.
Oh, that's terrible. And even if they do have their right paperwork, there's still lots of bureaucracy, especially because if you are from India, you have to deal with the Indian embassy as well as the British Home Office.
Absolutely. The way the system works is it's not as simple as you turn up to the Home Office and say, I want to go back. You have to have some sort of travel document. And the Indian High Commission, we deal with people from all over the world, but I have to say the Indian High Commission is notoriously difficult for getting documents and getting people to get passports and emergency travel documents so they can go back home.
I know, having some experience with them myself, it's a really long, tedious process.
Absolutely.
To get visas, to get paperwork for, from India sent back and forth. It is a bit of a nightmare.
Absolutely. And if you're sleeping on the streets, that just frustrates your situation more as well.
And if they are sleeping on the streets, are there any places that they can turn to, such as shelters, or do RAMFEL help as well in that regards?
At the moment, there's some emergency night shelters that have opened up, so we're working quite closely with the Salvation Army and the churches in Redbridge and in Newham to try and help people in that situation. But the worrying thing is that the government's proposing under the new immigration bill to actually make anyone who lets a property to somebody to actually get them to prove their immigration status as well. Okay. So whilst this year we're quite confident that a lot of the night shelters can help people, we don't know what that means in the future, because if you haven't got any access to public funds because of your immigration status, who's going to pay for your night shelter place?
Oh, okay. So you're kind of in no man's land if you don't have the right documentation and the status. Because what I found interesting was in the show, in the programme, there was someone who made £150 a week, yet he was kind of squatting in a house. So you think, if you are making money, even though it's illegally or illegitimately, how come you can't find a house and, look after yourself? But is that because...
Yeah, I think for people in that situation, part of the problem is finding affordable accommodation, but also for the continuity of work as well, because people tend to work cash in hand and they'll get short-term work, so they'll live hand to mouth. So from that point of view, they can't sign up to a tenancy agreement. The other thing that the government's going to propose in April is that you can't open a bank account if you haven't got rights to be in this country.
Okay.
So that's going to make it very difficult for a lot more people as well.
So how else do RAMFEL help? They help with, is it feeding and clothing?
We provide a food bank, and we also provide clothing as well. I mean, the strange thing is we get a lot of donations given to us, but very few men's clothes. So for a lot of people, they make do. Men obviously don't want to part with their clothes as much as women do. So that's a huge challenge as well.
Okay, and also for people who don't have the right status, the government have also recently clamped down on employers as well. So is that another problem that they're facing, that not only can they find somewhere to live, but they can't even find employment?
Absolutely. At the moment, if you're an employer and you employ somebody who hasn't got the right papers to be in the country, that can cost you up to £10,000. That fine will probably go up in April to £20,000 a year. That is making employers a lot more cautious. But again, the people who work cash in hand are usually working for less than minimum wage, working... we know of people, for example, Satpal, who was featured in the documentary, who was working for one person who didn't pay him, and he'd worked for him for 3 months. And at the end of it, he kept every day he just said to him, "I'll pay you tomorrow. I'll pay you tomorrow."
Oh, that's terrible, because you don't have access to any sort of...
You don't have access, yeah, and so you're stuck. You're stranded.
And have you faced a lot of criticism in this field as well? Because people often say that if you're illegal, you shouldn't be here in the first place. So, in some sense, I know it sounds really harsh, but people must say that, why should we look after people who shouldn't be here in the first place and who are illegal?
I can understand why people say that, but as we said in the documentary, one of the issues is you've got to understand the reasons why people ended up here. For a lot of people from the Asian subcontinent, they've paid huge amounts of money. Satpal, for example, paid £7,000 to come over here. He's still paying that money back, even though he's back in India, to an agent.
Okay.
So we've really got to look at the real issue, which is the middlemen in all of this, and it's the agents that are making the money. But surprisingly, we thought we were planning that before the documentary aired, and we hadn't seen it before it was broadcast, that we'd get a lot of public criticism. We did after the racist fans during the summer, and we took the government to court then, and we had a lot of media exposure. But surprisingly, so far, touch wood, most of the reaction has been quite amazing. People, I think, have been shocked because this isn't the side of immigration they expected to see. It's totally blown away the myth that people come over here and get benefits straight away.
Definitely, because I'm a conservative myself, and I always think, immigration is great. If it wasn't because of immigration, we wouldn't be here. But then you often think, people do come here from India, then they stay here. Most of them, come on a tourist visa or a student visa, and then they kind of outstay their welcome and then fall into the black market. You think, if you are really struggling, why don't you just go back to India? I mean, the government pay you to go back, but then seeing the programme, it isn't always as easy as it comes across.
There's a huge gap between what the government thinks it's doing and it can actually do as well. So the fact that if you are sleeping on the streets, you've got no regularity to your life, you've got no routine, and you will fall into drink, because who can sleep on the streets in this cold weather without a drink inside them? I know that sounds callous, but actually that's the reality of it, and I can't blame some of the clients for turning to drink. It's interesting that since Satpal's been back to India, he's not drunk.
That's amazing.
I think, it shows you the harshness of sleeping on the streets. But if you are drinking, you're going to miss appointments. You're going to miss crucial elements of trying to support you through the process to go back. But also, you are plagued by the fact that, sadly, the Home Office is a large bureaucratic machine, and it loses people in the system. And when that happens, that's enormously frustrating.
I can imagine. And it was really sad to see that so many people fall into drugs as well. And then to fuel their drug addiction, they go into crime. So it's like a massive kind of cycle, and they can't seem to get out of it.
It's an absolutely vicious cycle. And it's the real issue is that if you want to talk about controlling immigration better, you've got to look at the structures and systems that are used to administer immigration. And until you have a Home Office that is fit for purpose, you're not going to be able to change the way some people are forced into destitution at the moment.
And because, like, from your perspective, you're working with immigration, you're working with immigrants, you see all these problems on a daily basis. What would you propose that the government should do to make it easier?
I think the government should completely and utterly abolish the UK Border Agency and the Home Office as it is at the moment. It needs a very streamlined, very slick, very professional system and way of managing immigration. It's so busy on spin and promoting tough images of enforcement, of doing big publicity stunts like racist vans, that it's actually forgot that it's meant to process asylum applications, for example, within 6 months. Well, in some cases, we've still got clients waiting 6-7 years for an answer, for a basic answer.
6 or 7 years?
Oh, yeah. We have clients coming to the food bank who have been here, who've come to us for as long as I've been with the organisation, because they're waiting for a decision on their case. And, you know, it doesn't help. The Home Office sends out clients letters which say, do not ring us, do not follow this up, do not ask. You can try and go to the MP. MPs get stonewalled at the moment, you know, and it's just a waiting game for people. But while they're waiting, what do?
Of course, because they don't have recourses to benefits, all they do while they're waiting.
No, in most cases, most clients don't have any access to public funds, so they'll rely on charities like us for weekly food parcels, for clothing, for even children's reading books. So it's a huge challenge for them.
And are you facing any difficulties as a charity at the moment with these government regulations?
We see every client that comes into us has one sort of barrier or another. And even for those who've got status, just like everybody else in the country, they are facing great problems with the welfare system and access to employment. But I think for those who haven't got status, the huge challenge is that the Home Office is very rarely accountable. So you can't get follow-up with individual caseworkers. You can't get answers about how people's cases are progressing. And I think it's a desperation that some people end up in, because people have no hope and they can't plan anything. And they have no idea when it's going to end. So you end up in a vicious circle where, in some cases, their mental health and their physical health is seriously affected as well.
I can imagine, because one of the immigrants who was on the show, he had to get back to India within a certain amount of time. I think it was before 9 years, otherwise he wouldn't be able to get his pension.
Absolutely.
Which is quite worrying, because if you're in that situation, you know, what do you do?
Yeah, and getting out of the country is actually a lot more difficult
than getting
in. And that's the irony of the whole situation about voluntary return and voluntary departures, as they call it.
So it's not so easy and straightforward as it seems, and
absolutely.
Not so
and I think, you know, the Home Office have to take a huge... I mean, we had one individual, just to give you a quick example, an Indian national whose son had been killed back in Punjab. And over Christmas, he needed to fly back urgently for the funeral.
Definitely.
Now, from the time where we called started the system with him, his flight... They forgot to book his flight. Now, I would have thought that was fundamental to getting somebody out of the country. He eventually flew out on New Year's Day, 3 weeks after he originally asked for an emergency permission to leave the country.
That's terrible. So he missed the funeral.
He totally missed the funeral, yeah.
Okay, and we hear all these stories on the newspapers and on the TV about how there's going to be a huge influx of immigrants, or how there has been a huge influx of immigrants, especially the Romanians. Has RAMFEL, have you seen that? Have you seen lots of immigrants been coming in the past few years, or not at all?
I mean, there's two different ways of looking at that. Firstly, in terms of the Romanians and Bulgarians, we've been monitoring it very carefully, because like everybody else, we weren't sure what was going to happen. And I can honestly say, hand on heart, in the first week in January, from the 1st of January to the end of last Friday, we saw 47 clients, and only 2 of them were Romanian, no Bulgarians, and both of those ones had been here since 2009. This week we've seen no Romanians or Bulgarians. So,
so it's a bit of scaremongering.
They definitely, maybe they're still in Romania and Bulgaria. They're definitely not in the UK as far as we can see at the moment. It may be early days, but actually I don't think all the hype and let's be honest, a lot of the hype was not about actually the issue of immigration, it was about the issue of Europe.
Okay. We're just going to take a short commercial break, so stay tuned for some more chats on immigration.